Hello, everybody. Here I am with Marcos Dimas. Marcos is a visual artist from New York City who appears in the Martinez Gallery latest virtual exhibition, which is entitled Am I a New Rican? He joins Armando Soto and Martin Rubio, who are his colleagues from a very long time ago. So we're very
Mm-hmm.
happy to say hello to Marcos and to have the opportunity to interview him today.
Thank you
Marcos,
very much. Thank you
oh,
very much for having me.
I'm delighted that you could join us. Tell me something about your childhood. Where were you born? And no need to say when, but where. And
Yeah.
anything about your first memories of art.
Well, yeah, I was born in Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico. That's the southwestern corner of the island. And my parent, I lived between town and the country because my father's family was from La Finca Borinquen, and then my mother was in town. Her family was from town. So and I was in school in Puerto Rico, I think, till the second grade, and then we moved over to New York. And I was always drawing since I was a kid. I was just I would draw, and I remember drawing on the side of the house. We lived in a wooden house, and so so those were, and then my other memories is my uncle was also uh, an amateur artist, and he did a lot of drawings. And what was particular about him is that he also collected and in the fields a lot of Taino arrowak amulets, pieces of pottery and different little monkeys and different things. So that was my first experience in seeing Taino art from the Aboriginal uh, inhabitants of the islands of the Caribbean. So and then my other influence, I guess, was the art at the churches, the European based Catholic images in the churches. Um, so those were my two main influences in Puerto Rico before coming over to the United States. And like most families, we came over because there was no work. The farms were being sold off uh, by Luis Muñoz Marin and that government. Uh, they were turning Puerto Rico into an industrial economy from an agricultural economy, and most of the farms were sold off, and my family decided to move to New York. Well, we have family here in New York since the early 1900s. Since 1920, one of my mother's cousins was here, was one of the pioneers in that from that era. So we had a support system when we came over from Puerto Rico, and well, and then I became assimilated into the American culture from there on, you know. So
And what about the art in the States? What um, um, were you taking drawing classes in school? Did you go on field trips to the museum?
yeah,
Uh,
I did mostly I did a lot of drawings throughout, but I wasn't concentrating on that. I concentrated on the clothing industry because my father's family uh, excuse me, my mother's family was they were tailors and shoemakers. So 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 I studied at the High School of Fashion Industries to become uh, a garment worker, garment industry designer, pattern cutter, whatever the job be. And and I finished high school and then went to work, and then I got drafted into the army, and I went to into the army in 1963 or so, when the Vietnam War was basically starting. And and when I came out of the army, I was able to go take college courses under the GI Bill, which they paid for each day you were in the service. They paid a day of education.
Mhm.
And I went to the Fashion Institute of Technology, and
Right.
I wasn't able to get in. So the next choice was the School of Visual Arts. It was just I didn't even plan it. I just said, well, I'll go to the School of Visual Arts and do some art, do some study some commercial art or something to make a living. And that's where my professional quote um, trajectory started. At the School of Visual Arts.
And are you happy that it happened that way, or do you still wish that you had continued being involved in the fashion industry?
Well, that's a good question. I probably, I mean, in terms of an industry, fashion industry is an industry. The arts is not an industry. So there's the difference there. There's so there's a whole support system in the fashion industries, and but that's not uh, so so much in the arts. But while I was at the School of Visual Arts, I met Adrian Garcia, and through Adrian Garcia, I met Armando Soto, and Martin Rubio was attending the School of Visual Arts, and Tony Bechara was attending the School of Visual Arts, and all these artists were Puerto Rican artists, and I was able uh, to join that group and basically follow them wherever they went, because I just came back from the service, so I didn't know what was going on in terms of the social political climate here in New York. And they were already into that for a few years. They were being able to do to to participate in the social political climate that was happening.
So do
And through
you think
them,
of, go on.
well, to quote me off anytime you want, but I'll just keep talking.
No, I wanted to find out if you felt then with this group that you belong to a particular generation of young artists who were trying to make your way, and what were some of the common causes or common values that you think that group had?
Well, yeah, no. For one, we were all young Puerto Ricans working in doing contemporary art, not doing folkloric art, doing contemporary art. We were very much a part of the era of the times in our thoughts and in the and then so we became involved with the political artistic climate that was happening back in late 60s and early 70s. We joined the Art Workers Coalition, which was an organization of artists for advocating for artists' rights, and it was an anti-war movement also.
Mhm.
And became involved in that. Not too long after that, we were invited to exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum in an exhibition called Contemporary Puerto Rican Artists, which included Adrian Garcia, Martin Rubio, Armando Soto, and myself as part of the group. So we became a close knit group, and exhibiting together, creating exhibitions at the Loeb Student Center, and at that time there was an organization called the Friends of Puerto Rico, which was on 30th Street and 3rd Avenue, and that was run by Amalia Guerrero. And
Mhm.
Amalia was a rich Puerto Rican, and she developed this organization to promote Puerto Rican culture. And we were able to have exhibitions at that location and have artist studios. And that's where we met like Carlos Osorio and Rafael Tufino, which were basically Puerto Rican artists who had transplanted and come to New York. Uh, so they became our mentors in terms of creating like a cross uh, cultural um idea from New York to Puerto Rico. Like in other words, we were basically assimilated young Puerto Ricans, and they were island Puerto Ricans. So we learned a lot about the island, about the arts in the island from them, and of course they learned from the contemporary art that we were doing. So it was like a two way street there, you know.
So
Uh,
this is
so
about the time that El Taller Boricua begins, or the Puerto Rican workshop, no?
yeah,
And tell us something
this is
about that period.
this is leading to the development of the Puerto Rican workshop, the Taller Boricua, uh, and and some of the events that happened was that we were, as the Art Workers Coalition, we were demonstrating against the Museum of Modern Art, advocating for them to include Puerto Rican and Black artists in their collections. We were demonstrating against the Metropolitan Museum to be more inclusive and create cultural centers throughout the New York City, the five boroughs. You got to remember, this was '69, and it wasn't like today. A lot of the changes came about by our advocacy work during
Were
those
you one of
periods
the
of time.
people? Were you one of the people who, quote unquote, liberated the office of the director of the Met Museum?
Of the Met, yes. Thomas Hovind was the director at that time. Yes, and we took over the office with a sets of demands, and I don't remember exactly what they were right now, but they had something also to do with the Met was launching an expansion of their Met into the
To the park.
into the park, yeah, and that was one of the issues, that the Met shouldn't expand into the park because the park belonged to the people, to the
Mhm.
general population. So, and of course there was the issues of non-inclusive practices by the Met. After that, they hired a Puerto Rican called Irvin McManus to be the liaison between the Metropolitan Museum and the community. And Irvin is still around. He's still alive.
Mhm.
He was so anyway.
So that's one
And
of
with
my favorite stories. That's one of my favorite stories that I've learned about from that period. So go on telling us about the Taller Boricua.
Well, yeah, I also like to say that with the Art Workers Coalition, we were able to get a free day at the museums. We advocated for that, and we demonstrated against the museum to have a free day for the general people, also, And we also advocated to the New York State Council on the Arts to create programs to fund community centers. So that came about from our from our advocacy work during that time. So after all this, we decided, well, why are we trying to convert these organizations to support us? Let's just create our own organizations, and that's when we decided to create the Taller Boricua, the Puerto Rican workshop. You know,
And
it
you've
came.
been leading it for quite a number of years, and you maintain, I think, like a freshness in your approach to it. How do you get all of that energy to continue?
Well, yeah, well, I'm about ready to retire. I'm already about ready to let it go already. But I've been since the beginning, since prior to the beginning, because I also look at the time that we spent doing all the demonstrations as sort of like the lead into becoming an organization, and we were able to get some space in East Harlem from the Real Great Society, which is a community organization, and they were linked with the Urban Planning Studio and young architects that were also mostly Puerto Rican, but Black and Puerto Rican. And Manuel Otero was part of the Urban Design Studio, decided to come along and join us, and he was instrumental in doing a lot of the work that we didn't know how to do, which was get an organization uh, incorporated, and get it on the road to become a non-for-profit and fill out all the applications and do all the paperwork that needed to be done. So he was very instrumental in doing that, and we've had a lot of stumbles. But we were first. Our first location was across the street from the Young Lords political party, so we also did a lot of the posters from that time, uh, contributing to the cause of. The Young Lords were doing a lot of community work, so. Those were the raw beginnings of the organization way
So
way
you took
back.
on you took on that tradition of poster making, which is a very strong tradition in the island, and also here became a very strong tradition in
Yes,
El
yes,
Taller.
yes. We incorporated a printmaking workshop right away. That was one of the basic elements of the Taller Boricua, the Puerto Rican workshop, and since then uh, uh, we incorporated Carlos Osorio and Rafael Tufino from the Friends of Puerto Rico to join us. So then we had our mentors, and we started doing printmaking, and and they were part of the printmaking movement in Puerto Rico with the what was it called, the División de Educación de la Comunidad.
Mhm.
División de Educación de la Comunidad, where they would do posters for films, they do print books, they would do a whole lot of, they would use the artists, sort of like the artists were used during the WPA project in the United States, where they put the artists to work painting murals and in post offices and doing silkscreen and different work. So in Puerto Rico, they adapted a similar program under Luis Muñoz Marin, and to put the artists to work, and they created a lot of the of the during the
Community
50s, which was
education.
huh
Community education.
community education, yeah, and they created the golden age of Puerto Rican printmaking, which was in the between the 40s and the 50s, where their prints went worldwide and would be regarded anywhere in the world as top class A prints. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
So tell me what inspires you to be an artist every day. What are the themes that you explore? What are the issues that you look at and you're still sort of enthralled by?
Well, yes. Well, I'm an artist basically, and I live my life as an artist, so I'm always constantly researching or looking or studying or creating. Uh, I do art basically as a compulsion. You know, it's a
Mhm.
compulsive uh, um, form of living. But and so, in terms of my personal artwork, when I was at the School of Visual Arts, I was influenced by the by the pop artists, which some of them were my teachers at the School of Visual Arts, and uh, and I did a lot of work based on that aesthetics. But once I started to hang out with the Puerto Rican guys, I started to do research. Rafa Ortiz Montañez was the first. He was the first. The creator of the Museo del Barrio. He was the founder and creator of the Museo del Barrio. And Rafa Ortiz, as we call him, he calls himself Rafael Ortiz Montañez now. But uh, he was collecting images of Taino imagery, you know. So I was influenced, and then of course I was influenced by the Taino imagery that my uncle had collected
Right.
while he was a young man in Puerto Rico. So I started using that and relating it to like a surreal imagery, and started to work using that imagery. And then at that point, like the main members of the Taller Boricua adopted personalized Taino imagery symbols, sort of like to sign off on the prints and the artwork. So the Taller started becoming a popular projector of the imagery of the Taino, and the influences of the different Puerto Rican cultures, as the African and the Spanish, and so so in my personal work, I've always since then I always even if I don't do it, I always have those uh, the background of those influences in my DNA already.
Mhm.
So anything I do it comes from my DNA that I have established since. Um,
But outside of
Again,
carrying it through, are there questions that you see yourself uh, exploring or trying to answer when you're doing your work? And how is your work now different from, let's say, 20, 30 years ago? Or are you still kind of pursuing some of the same questions?
I'm still pursuing some of the same questions, definitely. And 20 or 30 years ago, I was doing work that laid heavily on the urban landscape. That was during the time of the decade of that what we call here the decade of fire, which was when there was fires throughout the South Bronx, the Lower East Side, and different places where landlords were burning their buildings to collect
Insurance.
to collect insurance. Yeah, and so during that time, I had a residency in the South Bronx in the Longwood Arts Project, and I started to do a whole series of paintings, artwork using found objects, that I would relate to the streets or to what I would see in the streets or what I would pick up from the streets or whatever. So that's what I was doing 20 years ago. This last um, phase of work, I've been doing um what I have done a whole series on the Gulf Coast, the oil spills in the Gulf Coast back in about 6 years ago or something like that, that devastated a lot of the natural wildlife and so that had its own. So I do different series of work basically.
Uh-huh.
I
Okay.
do series of work depending on some social, political, some not, some cultural, some not. So yeah.
So your work is at the museum, the Contemporary Art Museum in Puerto Rico, and you're probably one of the few quote unquote New Ricans whose work they hold in the permanent collection. And you, which must make you feel really great, but on the other hand, do you feel comfortable with the label New Rican?
Yes, I do. And the reason for that is because we developed, whether you want to call it Neo-Rican or alternative art movement, we developed a whole art movement in New York City that was based on identity and uh, and 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 uh, and all those things, and then we partnered, of course, with a lot of the poets like Pedro Pietri. I met Pedro Pietri like back in 1969 with Adrian Garcia, who was also one of the founding members of Taller. He just said, "Come on, let's go hear my friend." I went over to him, and so I met Pedro Pietri back then, and a lot of the poets and a lot of the poets and the visual artists sort of like merged and communicated, and there was a lot of organizations that sprung up based on this new alternative art scene, which included like Mocha, Museum of Contemporary Hispanic Arts, which evolved from Cayman Gallery, which evolved from Friends of Puerto Rico, and the Alternative Museum with Gino Rodriguez, photographer, and Foco, the group in Foco, which is photographers.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a good mixture in the movement towards creating new art that was relevant and had its significant identity clause also.
So you obviously have a lot of staying power. Your work and both as an artist and as an organizer in El Taller. And and we've come to the end of this interview, but I must say that I think you probably have been blessed by the fact that Cabo Rojo is not far away from the Parguera Bay.
Right. Yeah.
Phosphorescent, one of the few phosphorescent areas in the world, and perhaps those little things in the water are blessing you as you go along your route. I'm really very pleased that you gave us some time today, and I hope that at some time we can talk a little bit more about some of the things that you're involved in, Marcos Dimas. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much for having us in that exhibition. Also, yeah. And
Okay.
I'm glad to be with my old buddies,
Yes,
Armando and Martin. You know.
it's a terrific group. I couldn't have a better group.
Hmm.
Thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.